Good evening, councillors, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to this meeting of the Audit and Governance Committee. I am James Cantwell, and I am the Vice Chair for this committee, and I'll be chairing the meeting tonight. Before we move into the preliminary items of this evening's agenda, I need to run through a couple of housekeeping rules. Please be advised that this meeting is being live streamed on YouTube, recorded, and will be transcribed for the official record. By remaining in the room, you consent to be included in the recording and transcript. When addressing this meeting, please ensure that you do so through the microphone system at all times, speaking clearly and directly so everyone in the room, remote participants, and recordings can hear you. Mobile phones should be switched off or set to silent mode. Finally, please be advised that abuse or intimidation of any kind will not be tolerated. Any disturbance will result in the meeting being adjourned. Anyone who is deemed to breach these requirements will be warned and asked to refrain. And if the behaviour persists, they will be required to leave the meeting. Now we will move to part one of the agenda, the preliminaries. Are there any apologies?
Yes, Chairman. Apologies for absence have been received from councillors Anton Danny, Patsy Marson, Barry Pierpoint, David Scoot, and co-opted independent member Adam Cartwright.
Thank you. Does any member wish to declare any interest in respect of items on the agenda? No. Okay. And do I have committee's permission to sign the minutes of the meeting held on the 19th of January 2026? And are there any outstanding actions from the last meeting?
Chairman, the action sheet from the meeting on 21st of April was circulated with the agenda. There are no outstanding actions.
Thank you. Are there any questions from members of the public received 2 clear working days prior to this meeting?
There are none for this meeting, Chairman.
Thank you. We'll move on to part 2, the agenda items. The first item on the agenda is the Q4 2025-2026 risk report, which starts on page 17 on the agenda pack. Suzanne Rolfe, Group Manager for Insights and Transformation, is in attendance. Suzanne, would you like to present?
Thank you. So this is the usual quarterly risk report as at the end of March. There's a high level, can you hear me okay? There's a high level view in the covering report. So as usual, you can see the summary risks, the scores, the direction of travel, the dates where the action is planned, and some commentary on what has changed since the last report. On page 18, you can see that summary for the council's strategic risks. So these are risks to the council delivering its services. I'll draw your attention to a few of those risks on page 18. So risk number 12 is the Environment Act. As you know, with waste, that's quite a large project that's underway at the moment. There's a programme board in place and a delivery group which are keeping an eye on all of the risks and feeding that up into this overarching risk that you receive. They're updating that on a regular basis. At the end of March, you'll see that was a high risk, and we're reviewing that again at the end of Q1, which is tomorrow, which will come in your Q1 risk report. So the target is to reduce that to a medium risk over the next 3 to 6 months. The other risk I wanted to mention was 16, which is around capacity. So we've changed the emphasis of that risk. It's now called change readiness and workforce resilience. So that's around a more positive look at what's happening with LGR and changes that are coming through, where last year the risk was around our capacity to deliver. Now it's around being ready for that change that's coming, and some of those actions are more within our control. There are things we can do to be ready and to support the workforce in that. There's more detail in the appendix for this, but this is just the overview in the covering report. Another couple that I wanted to mention are risk 20 and 28. So that service delivery is risk 20 and LGR is risk 28. We've moved those to the partnership register because they're not just to do with individual councils, and we can manage those across the partnership. So you'll see those at a later time. Risk 24 is the health and safety risk, which we talked about at the last meeting. That had got some red actions last time. So those actions have been completed and the risk score has now reduced. Just to balance that out, we have risk 26, which is the local plan risk. That score has actually increased in the last quarter. There's some new legislation that's come out around local plan, and that's being worked through, but that means that the risk score is higher than it was at the last meeting, and there's some actions that will come by the end of this year to update you on that. And the last one I wanted to mention for the council risks is the server risk, which was risk 29, and that project is completed, so the risk is now removed. So on page 19, you can see there the matrix of the spread of risks. So it gives us an idea of where those risks sit across the board. And you'll see that technology infrastructure, cyber and budget are our highest risks because of the impact of those. And waste and local plan are the two project risks are the highest. So as an assurance for the committee, those seem reasonable. So page 20 is the risks to the partnership. We have the two risks from the council register that have moved on to this partnership one, and some of the wording has been updated, and there are two action dates that are in the next quarter. So again, looking at that matrix and the spread of the risks, the highest risks are 6, 7 and 8, which is LGR, funding and staffing, which again, for assurance, makes sense. Page 21, we have our fraud risks. So there have been no major changes since the last report. So what we're doing for quarter one is talking to each of the individual leads for the fraud risks that have been identified, and talking to the managers about if there are any additional fraud risks that they want to add in. So that will come forward in the quarter one risk update. At the bottom of page 21, you'll see that because it's quarter four, we have an update on all of our high operational risks and any exception reporting of operational risks, again to give committee assurance that the framework is being followed and the operational risks are being managed in the same way as the strategic risks. And there are 3 operational risks there that you'll see that were identified by internal audit reports in the past year. So again, as a committee, that takes you full circle to see where those issues have been raised, and they're now being monitored on the operational risk register around PSPS, grant administration and AI. Talking of internal audit, there is an audit underway at the moment of training, awareness and engagement in risk. So we expect that to be completed by quarter one. So in your next report, we'll be able to give you an update on the risk framework, on risk appetite and improvements to formatting of this report, which will be suggested. So we'll focus on that in quarter one. But if there are any areas that you wanted to look at in particular for future meetings, I wondered, going back to the action list, there were a couple of areas that were mentioned around digital connectivity and AI that we're looking into more detail on that. If you'd like to, we can liaise with the chair and put that as a future agenda item after quarter one so that we can dig into those if they're of interest to you, or any of the other ones on that list. If there's any questions or items you want to talk more about, happy to take those questions.
Excellent. Thank you very much for that, Suzanne. I will now open the meeting for comments and questions. Gideon.
Thank you, Chair. You mentioned about AI, thank you. And I think it will be interesting to explore that a little bit further. That the AI governance remains medium with further mitigation at the end of September 2026. I'd be interested, are staff already using AI within the council? And if they are, how are we managing those risks? And on the flip side of that, if they're not using it, then that's possibly a risk in its own right, in that we're not using it to its full abilities at the moment. Thank you.
Thank you. Yes, AI is in use and we have a policy to cover that. And there's a working group that meets regularly to share good practice and to ensure that staff know how to use it and the pros and cons. There's a separate risk register as well for AI, and that feeds into this one. But again, as we come across things, that's being added to the risk register. But I think if you're happy, we could bring that as a future agenda item.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, I've got a question. It's page 25, and we'll talk about significant risk. And one's the impact of the Environment Act. I just wonder, looking in the column about details, it talks about increased number of vehicles. And so my question is about the depot. Is this the St John's Road depot? Has it been expanded? Has it been expanded to take account of the new freighters? And if so, when do those new freighters start into service? I know, Suzanne, perhaps you can't answer that, but another officer can. It'd be useful. Thank you.
I don't have the detail, but I'll come back to you with that.
Okay, thank you.
Are there any other questions or comments? No? I think I've just got a couple from myself, Suzanne. On page 14, number 5 on the action list, it mentioned the battery energy storage systems, which I had raised previously. And it mentioned this will be included in the Q4 review and update. I couldn't see it mentioned, and I just wondered, have I missed that somewhere, or is it still to come?
Sorry, I should have outlined that as well. It is in the appendix. It's under the action column. It's something that Corey's picking up with partners. So but there is a little bit of an update in there, but there's more we need to do. So we catch up with you before the next report, if that's okay. But yes, it's under the action for risk 5 in the appendix.
Excellent. Thank you very much for that. I think that answers my question. So the committee is asked to note and comment on this report. Is everyone happy to take this as noted? So, oh, yeah.
Forgotten that PSPS gets a mention in this. Therefore, didn't declare my interest as a director of PSPS. So may I do that now?
That's fine, Councillor. We'll make sure that's recorded. So is everyone happy to take that as noted and that the comments have been duly recorded by officers? Thank you very much. The second item is the Combined Assurance Status Report for 2025-26. This starts on page 35 of the agenda pack. John Medler, Service Director for Legal and Governance, is in attendance. John, would you like to present?
Thank you, Chairman. This report provides the committee with an overview of the Council's combined assurance position for year 2025-26. The assurance report, which is at Appendix 1 to the cover report, starts on page 39 of the agenda pack and concludes on page 51. If I take you to page 41 of the agenda, this page sets out the process which the Council undertakes to identify a map assurance using the 3 lines of defence model. So the first line of defence that we use as part of this model is that provided by management, who have responsibility for the particular service or project that's contained within the report. The second line is provided by those that provide internal insurance and functions or external inspection. So that could be things like compliance with risk management framework and policies. And the final level includes any independent assurance that's been received by the internal audit team, which all feeds into providing an overall combined assurance level for the activity or project within the report. That whole process has been coordinated by the internal audit team and then is presented to SLT for quality checking and final review. This work was undertaken earlier this year, and obviously it is a snapshot in any particular point in time, and so things do move outside of that period, but this was the last full review that was undertaken. The results of all of this work are then used to inform a number of things. It helps with informing the future internal audit plan, And it also focuses managers to look at areas of improvement which are required in the next 12 months. So also on page 41 of the report, you have the overall assurance levels for critical activities across the council. And pleasing to say, overall, the assurance picture is stable and positive, with strong governance arrangements, effective partnership working, and no widespread evidence of uncontrolled risk. Most service areas are green rated, indicating embedded controls and effective day-to-day risk management. You've got 65% of activities having a green assurance level compared to 62% in last year's report. Red rated areas are limited, but financial resilience, implementation of Uniform 2023 and the upgrade of the 2008 servers require continued oversight. 3% of activities this year have a red assurance level compared to 1% last year. And then you have amber rated areas which are being actively managed and include things like waste reform, homelessness pressures, housing advice triage, ICT, cybersecurity, planning, local plan work, health and safety, benefits, council tax and key transformation projects, many of which my colleague Suzanne's just referred to in the risk register report that you've had previously. And there's 32% of those activities have an amber assurance level compared to 37% last year. The report then breaks down that overall assurance level by each of the 4 councils' directorates. So you have the Communities Directorate on pages 42 to 43, the Corporate Directorate, page 44, the Programme Delivery and Senior Information Risk Owner Directorate on pages 46 to 47, and the Growth Directorate on page 48. There is then a further section dedicated to the assurance, looking at assurance of our work through our strategic partnership with PSPS, and that's on page 49. And then finally, there is a section which is reviewing the key projects in the council on pages 50 to 51, and a summary there within the commentary that during the last financial year, our arrangements for project governance have matured, with the Major Projects Board providing structured oversight of financial delivery and reputational risks. So in summary, the committee is invited to note the generally positive assurance position, recognise the strength of the council's governance and partnership arrangements, and the recommendation in the report is that the committee reviews the Combined Assurance Status Report 2025-26 as attached to Appendix 1 and seeks to assure itself that the findings illustrate that the assurance framework is operating effectively as part of the council's overall corporate governance arrangements. If members do have any questions tonight, in addition to myself and Russell, the 151 officer who's in the room, we've also got Andy Fisher from the Growth Directorate in the room, and James Gilbert and Maria Cottam from other directorates online, should members have any questions. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you, John. I will now open the meeting for comments and questions. Councillor Woodliff.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Chairman. I noted 2 things. Well, first of all, I noted on page 45 in the comments on the council. It's very, very good to notice that it says that council set a balanced budget without need for an efficiency target, as in previous years. That's a very, very important point, I think, and it's worthwhile commending the council for achieving that. Yeah, but I note also that it might mentions a bit about the IDBs. Now, the IDB is a kind of like the Achilles heel here, isn't it? Really, because you'll eat away everything we have. We need to know really what the council is going to do to be able to protect its budget in the future, because otherwise we won't have a budget at all, because the IDBs will be swallowing it up. There's one other thing I noticed is that I have a question about on page 46. It talks about one significant ASIRO incident. I presume is that senior information risk owner, because that's what it is in the NHS. It's at the bottom. One significant ASIRO incident occurred during the year in relation to a partnership-wide IT security something issue, I should imagine, that saw a swift, effective response and a decision making by the ASIRO to immediately close down a cyber threat which the partnership has been exposed to by a third-party software provider. Can members be informed any more about what that was about? Because it's quite a serious matter, isn't it? If a third-party software provider exposes the council to risk, do you have anything to say about that? You know, within the bounds of the fact that we're a public committee. So tread carefully, Andy, please.
Thank you, Chairman. Yeah, so that was my decision based on advice from the Data Protection Officer, Mr. Gilbert, colleagues across the partnership, and our IT team. It left our firewall and the data and the security measures in place with the potential for a cyber attack that we wouldn't have been able to detect. So it was an immediate, easy decision that we closed down the system. We removed the threat, risk and harm entirely, and we've implemented a whole series of workarounds that Mrs. Rolfe and her team ensured seamless operability of all of the systems that were affected.
Do we know the origin of that, apart from it's a third-party software supplier? Was it the Chinese or Mr. Putin?
No, sorry, it's one of our. It was a large corporate supplier, and it didn't just affect our organisation. It was a patch failure that affected all organisations that use the software. So no, it wasn't an attack. What it was a glitch in the system that protected any attack. So we simply turned it off. We put in alternative working arrangements so that there was no threat, risk or harm that any organisation could suffer.
Sorry, thank you. If I refer to the data breach report, the data protection officer in connection with the, is that correct? Is it senior information risk owner? Yep, okay. The response to the breach was immediate with the ICO closing down self-reported by return. Can you tell us anything more about that? Was that an internal issue of ours, or was that caused by somebody outside our system?
Thank you, Chairman. That was an internal coding issue that was brought to not just to my attention. My job is to take the strategic ownership and leading of that risk, but actually the data protection officer role, unlike the CIRO role, is a statutory responsibility. Very clear advice from the data protection officer was it was reportable to the commissioner within 24 hours of receiving it. They had analysed our response to it, closed the investigation down. So as many reports are, they're precautionary, but it's good practice to really ensure that you are open and transparent in anything that to do with data breaches that could affect individuals or wider organisations.
To commend the council in its actions it's taken. It's very, very good. At least we're not going down the pathway of Gloucester City Council. I kind of open its doors and let everybody in. We're taking the right action. And it's very, 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 very reassuring that the council's in very secure hands. So well done. Well done. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you, Councillor Woodliff. Councillor Noble.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, first of all, I think the report is very well set out. I particularly liked the way the areas of responsibility were set out, for example, on page 43, when they're talking about the Communities Directorate. One or two comments. CIRO, I had no idea what that was. And like the previous document, it didn't have a glossary. So that's been made clear what that is. Senior Information Risk Owner, is that correct? Yeah. Okay. I've got a question to do with page 45. Well, actually, before that, the page, I thought positives on page 42, the fact that the partnerships reached its efficiency target of 42 million 5 years earlier, I thought it was good, and be able to set a balanced budget, all very positive. This is on page 45, and it's referring to local government reorganisation. Now, according to this, it says the future government model of governance for Greater Lincolnshire is expected in July 2026. Is that still the case, or are we expecting some delay in that? Does anybody know the answer to that? Thank you.
James, did you want to come in on that one?
Yeah, if I can help. So despite the change in Prime Minister, the indication is very much still that we do anticipate the decision.
Sorry, we're just going to pause you for a minute just while we sort out the volume. Or
I'm going to go again, Manda.
We'll just hold for a minute while we get IT to sort the sound out. James, could you try it again for us now?
Yeah, thank you, Councillor. Is that clearer?
That's a lot clearer. Thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you very much indeed. In respect to the question from Councillor Noble, so despite some of the changes nationally in terms of potentially a new Prime Minister coming in, that hasn't changed the direction of travel in respect of LGR, we understand at the moment. So we do expect an announcement week commencing the 13th of July. The Ministry is still telling us that is the week when they're anticipating the announcement just before the parliamentary summer recess. So we have been told the length of time between when we're told the decision and when it's announced formally will be very, very tight. So I would just say to members, if you do hear the outcome in the media as opposed to through us officially, we have done our best and we are doing our best to try and avoid that being the situation, but it could happen. It won't be through us not trying to be prompt in letting you know.
Thank you. Were there any? Gideon.
Thank you, Chair. On page 45, financial resilience is rated as red. We've not seen anything to justify that. Is there an explanation on that, please?
Yeah, if I can, Chairman. Yes, and I think going back to John's earlier comments, this was obviously prepared late autumn, so before we had the finance settlement at that point. I think in terms of financial resilience, there are obviously two issues. One, as it sets out here, we've got a balanced budget for current year, but what we retain is a deficit for the following year. So there's still some further work to do to actually get the council's finances in the order we'd like them long term. And that's why it's still showing that there's that transition between having a funding gap across all years to still having a funding gap in future years. But that's something we're starting work on already to try and get in place before we get to the next budget cycle.
Thank you. Also, there's a mention of uniform, and my co-opted colleague Adam and I kind of chatted over email about it, and we couldn't quite work out what that was. We thought it was all the uniforms that people were going to start wearing or something. Realised what it was after a while. I don't think it's been brought up on the Audit and Governance Committee meetings in the recent past. Anyway, that's by the by. Can we have an update on its implementation? Has it gone live? And also what plans the partnership has got to assess the value for money and the performance of that, please?
I'll just take James quickly before we go on to them.
Yeah, thank you very much. So in respect of the question in relation to uniforms, so you'll see there's two reds under the critical activities. They're both interlinked, so I'll just cover them both if that's okay for context. So where you see upgrade of 2008 servers, that is not actually a Boston Borough Council risk directly. That's an East Lindsey District Council risk directly. It has two old servers that have got the older system prior to uniform on, and so until we've withdrawn that system from East Lindsey, we can't turn those servers off. And obviously putting Boston into that environment while those two servers, which are legacy servers, exist, would create a risk to Boston. So so if we can just discount the upgrade of 2008 servers, because it isn't a direct risk to Boston, but it would be if the implementation of Uniform went ahead at this point in time. So implementation of Uniform. So Uniform is a huge system. It's been implemented at East Lindsey over the past 3 or 4 years, and Boston approved a business case around about 18 months or so ago, which was to deploy it at Boston and also South Holland. So the idea is we brought all services onto a very similar system, so teams could work simultaneously and kind of very successfully across the partnership where we had got shared teams. At the point of producing this document kind of 6 or 7 months ago, at that point we hadn't got a project plan in place. Because it was in the infancy of the project's development. What I would say is Boston are doing really well in terms of delivery of that project now. So 2 weeks ago, the test data went across to iDocs that own the system, and we're currently in a period where they are now loading that into the test environment for us. We are due to deliver that system in line with the business plan, which was by the end of this financial year. We're only looking at planning and building control at this point in time, and in a few months' time, we'll start work on environmental health and some of the other services which need to transfer as well. There's a very clear argument in terms of the financial case for this particular product. It will take a number of old systems out of Boston, so there's a revenue saving for the borough, as well as being able to align systems across the partnership at a much reduced cost to taxpayers.
Thank you for that, James. Nicola, would you like to come in? No? Okay. Are there any more questions? Or I'll take Councillor Pryke and then Councillor Noble.
Thank you, Chairman. On page 51, the last but one paragraph mentions, for example, significant internally funded projects such as the East Lindsey Investment Fund. And I'm wondering, is this a reference to the failing or failed housing provision vehicle in East Lindsey Council? And does that have any effect on Boston's assurance?
Which officer wanted to take that one? Andy?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. No, in preparing that's an explanation of what the Major Projects Board is, because that covers the partnership, not just the local authority, not just Boston. And East Lindsey is the only one of the three partner councils that has significant capital and revenue investment of its own resources going to external projects, hence why it's referenced in there. Has no association and no bearing to Boston Borough Council, but is material in explaining the purpose and function and governance arrangements around the Major Projects Board.
To whatever it's called, East Lindsey Invests or something. And equally...
Sorry, I understand. No, I think what you're talking about is Invest East Lindsey Limited, the wholly owned company of East Lindsey District Council. No, this is East Lindsey Investment Fund, which is a significant sum of money that East Lindsey is investing in a whole host of projects across its district.
Okay, and equally it has no reference to South Holland's housing revenue account.
No.
Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Noble.
Thanks, Chair. Yes, question for Mr. Stone. Because I think you said that there was projected to be a deficit for the following year, 2027 to 28, and yet we have no efficiency sort for this year. So do you have any notion, any idea of how big this deficit is likely to be or projected to be, and what we're doing to mitigate against that?
Yes, thank you, Chairman. Yes. So in terms of the gap, when we approved the MTFS back in March, that included projections for 27, 28 and the following years as well. And that set it approaching 1.5 million as the funding shortfall for that year. In terms of the work that's going on in the background, obviously we're looking at any sorts of efficiencies that can be driven out. You appreciate from the budget that has just finished, the outturn report that's been through Cabinet last week. That showed that we delivered the efficiency saving identified for the previous year with a surplus as well. So that's the first port of call, if you like, to identify potential savings for next year. In addition to that, we're looking at across all our spending areas, potential income opportunities around fees and charges, and how we're financing core activities as well, along with potential from our collection fund. So we're looking at all avenues available to us to make sure that we get that budget as close to balance as we can do. Obviously, in the context of LGR and potentially, well, from now we're sort of a 20-month window or thereabouts to get things in order.
And through you, Chair, can I just ask? You mentioned a surplus. What was the extent of that surplus?
The surplus was around £70,000, but that was in the context of an efficiency requirement of, I think it was 650,000. So if you put the two together, you're talking in excess of 700,000 as an overall position.
Say again, sorry. Say again.
Collectively, that's looking at over £700,000.
Thank you. Thanks, Chair.
Thank you. Are there any final comments or questions before? No. Okay. So the committee is asked to note, and we have commented. Is everyone happy to take this as noted? Thank you very much. The next agenda item is the Internal Audit Annual Report and Opinion for 2025-2026. This starts on page 53 of the agenda pack. The Audit Manager, Mark Harrison, is in attendance virtually. Mark, would you like to present this item for us?
Thank you, Chair. This is the Head of Internal Audit's annual report, including her opinion for the 2025-26 financial year. The report sets out the purpose and approach taken by internal audit across the year, along with aspects that were used to inform the audit plan the committee supported. Page 60 in your pack includes the framework she used to inform the assessment of her opinion, and I am pleased to confirm that sufficient work in volume and quality has been completed to provide a reliable basis for her opinion. Pages 62 to 67 share the summary details of audit work completed, the governance, risk and control environment, as the Head of Internal Audit saw it for the financial year, and additional aspects that informed her adequate opinion. Page 68 shares more information of our internal quality processes and confirms there were no quality impairments to the work delivered. Page 70 provides an overview of all the Boston Borough Council audit work delivered, categorised by insurance rating. I'm happy to take any questions, Chair.
Thank you very much. I will open for questions and comments. Councillor Woodliff.
Thank you, Chairman. I noticed on page 62 it mentions that there insufficient controls. Is it 7% of the area? Is that right? I'm not quite sure what I understand by that.
Yes, Councillor, that relates to the identification and monitoring of savings review. There was 2 reviews conducted, if you'll remember, that were both presented to the audit committee. Right. The first one was in Q1 of last year, and there was insufficient controls for us to carry out the review. As a result, the Section 151 put in place controls, and we went back in Q4 and again presented that to the committee in the last committee meeting, where we reported back to say that obviously controls were in place, and it was a limited assurance because obviously we weren't able to review or test those controls as they'd just been set up. But again, we are due to go back in at Q4 of this year to review again. I hope that is able to answer your question.
Yes, it does. Can I carry on? Yeah. Thank you, Joe. I also noticed on page 64, it says, while the overall framework is fit for purpose, improvement is required to strengthen risk management practices to allow the governance and audit committee to place full reliance on the work. Can you go into further depth on that, please, for us?
That's based on a recent audit report that will be coming to yourselves, that was just spoken about earlier on during the committee, and that's based on that report, which will also be reported. It's currently in draft form, so it will be put towards yourselves at the next interim report.
It also mentions that on the same page, page 64, training and awareness arrangements are informal and unstructured, with no defined programme, monitoring or evaluation. Actions agreed following the 2025 internal audit report remained incomplete and not embedded. Any comments on that? Where are we going on that?
Perhaps the officers who are responsible for those actions, we may be able to answer that on your behalf.
I think the important thing in that line is actually evaluation. It's a training and awareness arrangements were informal and unstructured with no defined programme, monitoring or evaluation. There has to be an evaluation, doesn't it, really, on a training programme to ensure that it serves its purpose. Like any particular function or action, you have to evaluate whether or not that particular action has been productive. So do you have a comment or view on that? To advise us members?
Those are obviously the findings that were found, as I said, in this current review that is in draft form. And obviously we have to allow the officers the time to address those management actions, but that was part of our findings.
Right, okay. I'll have to accept that, I'm afraid, Chairman. Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, I'll just take John.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Thank you, Councillor Woodliff, for those questions. As Mark's alluded to, the report is currently in draft format. So when that report comes to committee next time, we'll have a much more in-depth look at what those findings were and what actions we've taken since and what we're proposing to do to address those. So you'll get a full report with a lot more detail about those areas of improvement and what action we're going to take at your next committee meeting.
I do think evaluation at the end is very important. You can't really make a judgment about whether something's successful unless you have some means to assess at the end and to make a judgment about whether that particular action or that particular training such was effective. You always have to training schemes and training. Well, I've done thousands of courses of training here. Whether they've all been effective or not is another matter. So you have to be able to evaluate what we do. I think it's a key area. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you. Councillor Noble.
Thanks, Chair. Yeah, I'm referring to page 63. I think this may have been alluded to earlier by Mr. Harrison. It was to do with, this is the last but one paragraph. In some instances, officers were unable to provide a full response to members' queries at the time of the meeting. This limited the committee's ability to undertake immediate and effective scrutiny. While responses may subsequently be provided outside the meeting, this can reduce the effectiveness of real-time challenge and the overall depth of discussion within the committee setting. So has internal audit received any sort of reassurance on that matter that such a situation won't recur? And can I just make the point that we're asked to submit questions on the basis of receiving the report, but there's quite a lot of papers to get through. You get them on a Monday, well, I did in this case. You've got to do your written questions in by Thursday. It's a push, especially for people who are working full time. So I don't know, have really any reassurance about what I just referred to earlier, Mr. Harrison?
Obviously, Councillor Noble, this is something that obviously has been picked up from yourselves, the fact that you have obviously asked questions and seek the opportunity to be able to scrutinise at the time. So it's as a result of listening to the committee. Obviously, the assurances that you seek would come from officers who you would be asking the questions of. So obviously, it would be from the officers that you require those questions that you would seek the assurances from.
Okay. Yeah, I've got another question, but I think it's good that we've got several members of the finance department here, which is good. I think one of our previous meetings we didn't have anybody. So the other thing is on page 65, where it talks about this under identification and monitoring of savings. Q1, a repeat audit was agreed to be undertaken once sufficient controls have been implemented. Has that now taken place, that repeat audit?
As explained to us previously, that was reported to yourselves in Q4. So that was at the last audit committee where I presented my final report for the year. And again, that was a limited assurance. And that was, as I said, the section 151 has put controls in place. But in order for us to test them, they have to be in place for a while. So as I said earlier, we will be coming back in Q4 of this year to review.
Thank you. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Gideon.
Thank you, Chair. On page 66, under identification and monitoring of savings Q4, the very last sentence, the audit also identified that although processes are in place to monitor savings, there's no formally documented escalation process for any savings proposals that are not on schedule to be delivered within the year. Is there going to be an escalated, a formal process for identifying things which are not going to be delivered on time? I'm sorry this has been covered before, but it's probably worth bringing up.
I would direct you, hopefully the section 151 should be able to answer that one.
Yes, thank you, Chair. Short answer is yes. So we have our more routine budget monitoring arrangements, and it will go into that where required. Beyond that, we also report these through the Transformation Board, and the Transformation Board terms of reference have been updated to include that as an escalation process and the method we would use where that's required. So hopefully that is now in place.
Thank you. Were there any further questions or comments? No, I would. I'll just note that In regard to the submitting questions early on reports, I think it's for this committee's members to judge whether they feel that is a good way to go in our yearly appraisal, so to speak. I think it is vital that there is representation from the relevant teams where agenda items are being discussed. I know there has been some issues in the past where officers were not present to answer questions. That has been relayed both by myself and the chair to officers, and I think we can continue with that going forward. But yeah, fully appreciate your points, Councillor Noble. The committee is asked to note and comment on this report. So is everyone happy to take this as noted? Thank you very much. We will move on to the fourth agenda item, which is the unaudited financial statement for 2025-26. This starts on page 71 of the agenda pack. And Ellie Stacey, Head of Finance Delivery at Technical Corporate at PSPS, is with us this evening. Ellie, would you like to present this one for us?
Thank you, Chair. So I'm really pleased to present the unaudited financial statements for 25-26 to this committee ahead of the statutory deadline of the 30th of June.
Sorry, Ellie, could you just move the mic a bit closer to you?
Thank you. So I'm really pleased to present to the committee the unaudited financial statements ahead of the deadline of the 30th of June. And they were officially published on the website today.
Just need you to speak up a bit. I think your mic's a bit.
They were officially published on the website today, and the audit by KPMG will commence on the 13th of July. I will take the report as read, so I'm going to move straight to the appendix if that's okay. So that starts on page 77 of the agenda pack. So the first section of the financial statements is the narrative report, starting on page 79. So that sets the scene and tells the story as to the key events during the financial year for Boston. And the purpose of that narrative report is to really provide a high-level summary of what's happened during the year and make the accounts a little bit easier to understand. Just to draw a couple of bits out of the narrative report. So on page 85, we've got a couple of pie charts on there. So the first one shows the sources of income for the council for the financial year. The majority of the income comes from fees, charges and other service income, and also government grants and subsidy towards benefits. And also you've got quite large proportions in there relating to council tax and business rates income. And then in the pie chart at the bottom of the that page, it shows the expenditure by service director. So again, there's quite a large proportion there for finance, which does include benefits expenditure, and quite a large proportion there for economic growth as well. Turning over to the next page, page 86, that shows the general fund outturn table as presented to Cabinet on the 24th of June. So the Cabinet report does explain in further detail the outturn against the budget for each service director area. So for any explanations of reasons for underspends or overspends against those, the Cabinet report is the place to refer to. That does show a surplus in year of 64,000. And then on the next page, that shows the capital outturn for 25-26, which shows an underspend of £17 million against the capital programme. What I would stress in presenting that figure is due to the nature of these projects, they do span more than one financial year. So it might be that, you know, the unspent budgets are obviously going to be utilised in 26, 27 and future years. The following page, page 88, shows the movement on the council's reserves and balances in the financial year as well, split by those specific reserves. And the following page gives an explanation as to the purpose of each of those reserves as well. Moving on to the four primary financial statements. So the first primary statement starts on page 93 of your agenda pack, and that is the comprehensive income and expenditure statement. So the purpose of this statement is to show the total accounting cost in the year of providing the council services in accordance with generally accepted accounting principles. So just to stress, this is not the amount to be funded by the taxpayer. This is the cost of providing all the council services, and it does include quite a few what we would call technical accounting transactions around revaluation of assets, pension transactions, depreciation, etc., which do not feature in the outturn against the budget. So just a few key movements to highlight. If you compare 24-25 on the left-hand side to 25-26 on the right-hand side. So the General Fund Assets Directorate does feature, as you would expect, quite a few of those accounting transactions in relation to the council's assets. So there can be some quite significant swings year on year with any revaluation changes, depreciation charges, etc. The finance line, you have got a slight reduction in both expenditure and income from 24-25 to 25-26, and that is mainly due to reduced benefits, income and expenditure. Moving down the table there on communities and housing services, there has been reduced expenditure on disabled facilities grants. Leisure and local services has seen a slight increase as well, but it is worth noting that the bereavement service moved from general fund assets in 24-25 presentationally to leisure and local services in 25-26 due to changes in which service directorate falls under. So it's just worth noting that some of these figures may not be directly comparable. When I've raised this with KPMG in previous years, they are reluctant to allow us to change 24-25 because that has been audited and that was the correct position at that point in time. You'll see on the neighbourhoods line that they have about £1 million additional income in 25-26, and that is due to additional grant income around food waste, the extended producer responsibility, and all the associated schemes with that. Moving further down to the bottom of that table, you'll see there's been quite a significant swing on income on the taxation and non-specific grants income and expenditure line. So 41 million income in previous year compared to 21 in current year. And that is purely because a lot of the capital grants and contributions that we are required to present in this line have been received in the prior year, and then they were taken to capital grants and applied at the end of 24-25 for drawdown in 25-26. But as per the presentation requirements of this statement, they have to be shown in the year that they're received. So moving on to the next primary statement, we've got the movement in reserve statement, and this effectively shows the movement in the council's usable and unusable reserves from the beginning of the financial year to the end of the financial year. And I think the only thing I would sort of draw the committee's attention to on this one is, as I've mentioned, those previous capital grants and applied, which had a starting balance of £34 million. Many of those have been drawn down in the financial year, 15 million, to leave a closing balance of just under 19 million. So the council's total reserves have reduced from just under 95 million to just over 89 million. The next primary statement is the balance sheet, which is on page 96. So just to highlight some of the key movements on the balance sheet, and what I would say before I talk through this one is this is a snapshot as at the 31st of March. So on a few of the lines, they are quite sensitive to timing, so I will highlight that as we go through. So the first line is property, plant and equipment. You'll see that there has been a £7 million increase in the property, plant and equipment from previous year to current year. £7 million of that was in addition in relation to assets under construction that have been added to the balance sheet in 25-26, and that is spend on things like Public Realm, Crown House and Rosegarth Square. And then the final £1 million is in relation to general valuation increases from previous year. Investment property has increased slightly in valuation. Long-term investments has reduced slightly, and that is due to the reduction in the fair value of the property funds. Short-term investments has reduced from just under £33 million to just over 17 million. And again, that's as a result of those capital grants and applied that have been utilised in 25-26, because that means that the council has got less funds to invest in order to generate investment income. Moving further down to the long-term liabilities, the pension liability has decreased from just over £10 million to just under £7 million, and that is due to changes in demographic and financial assumptions by the actuary. So the total movement on the balance sheet has, as I've said, reduced by just over £5.5 or just under £5.5 million. And that is in line with what was presented on the comprehensive income and expenditure statement. So we do see quite a few themes and figures repeated across these various statements, obviously, as they all are all interlinked. And then the final statement is the cash flow statement. So we are required to take the net deficit on the provision of services from the comprehensive income and expenditure statement, and then show how the cash flows relate to financing, investing and operating activities. And the notes where you can see the details behind those figures are 25, 26 and 27 within the notes to the accounts further in the document. So the rest of the document shows many supporting notes that provide a bit more detail and a bit more information behind those 4 primary statements as prescribed by SIPFA's Code of Practice on Local Authority Accounting. I didn't propose to go through those notes in any great detail, but what I did want to just do is highlight something that I mentioned at the previous committee, which was the change in the valuation approach. So I mentioned at the last meeting as part of the accounting policies paper that SIPFA had introduced a change in the code regarding the reduced frequency of valuations. So just to provide a bit of context for Boston, just over 20% of the assets that require valuation were valued in year 1, so in 25-26. They were generated by random sample, and it was representative of various assets across buildings, car parks, public conveniences, etc. The rest of the assets that do require valuation but weren't picked as part of that sample had the relevant indices applied to them to affect their valuation in line with SIPFA Code of Practice. As we worked through that process at year end, we did identify some assets where we couldn't find an appropriate index to apply. That was expected, and where that is the case, SIPFA do allow us to not effectively, we don't apply anything to those assets in year 1 and 2, and then in year 3 we are required to undertake a full valuation. So they have been put into the plan for the year 3 valuation process. In terms of next steps, so over the next couple of weeks ahead of the audit commencement date, myself and my team will obviously be reviewing all of the working papers and ensuring that they contain everything they require in order for KPMG to start the audit on the 13th of July. We do work quite closely with KPMG in terms of weekly progress meetings and frequent conversations around various aspects of the work that they are auditing. So obviously, hopefully at the next committee meeting, KPMG will be able to provide a progress update. I have got a couple of the other finance colleagues in the room with me because obviously this is a very complex and technical document and it is a team effort. So I am happy to take any questions.
Thank you very much for that. I will open the floor for questions and comments. Councillor Whitworth.
Thank you, Chairman. Thank you very much for a very interesting report. I noticed that when I look on page 90, it says, alongside these changes as to do with the current economic outlook, the council has been required by the government to take on significant additional activities such as the weekly food waste collections, while also suffering reductions in the level of funding by central government. So being caught in a trap there, haven't we? How we've been forced to take on extra responsibilities, and the government is ripping the carpet from underneath our feet by reducing the amount of money available. There is a really serious question about the cost of all this, isn't there? Because I presume it's going to require new lorries, whatever, an extra staff to be able to fund this. I couldn't find the report, the actual cost of it. I must have missed it. There's quite a lot here, isn't there? Can you give me some idea about how much you think it would cost the council to fund that particular activity? And if you can't do it here, I'll be happy to take a written answer later on if that's not possible. Are you able to help me on that? Or somebody else help me?
Yeah,
Can anybody help me on that?
Yeah, and I think we can probably have another conversation around this if it would help outside the meeting. But in essence, the government did provide some additional funding to support purchase of vehicles and the caddies. But when it's come to the actual funding for the day-to-day delivery of the service itself, they have said that is included within the overall funding settlement that we receive.
How kind of them.
Yes, incredibly kind of them. Obviously, what they have done for this year we're now in is quite a wide review of the way the finance settlement is distributed. Now, I think their argument would be the money is in there, but they were saying we were getting too much before. Now, we might have a different view. it's also not been possible, and though they haven't provided details of how much funding went into the system to pay for this. So I think we can probably draw our own conclusions around how that happened. What I would say is, in terms of the collection method, Boston is using or has purchased new podded vehicles. So essentially the food waste will have its own separate pod behind the cab, and then the waste will go in the rear of the vehicle as it would do normally. So that will hopefully reduce down any additional collection costs. Because in a number of other authorities, what they've actually done is purchase a separate fleet just to do food waste collections, and obviously that then needs to be resourced with people and fuel and so on. So hopefully for Boston it will be a more efficient way of collecting the waste, albeit it would have been nice if it was funded appropriately at the time.
Right. So the food waste collection is going to be done inside other vehicles, or is it anti-converted vehicles, or is it new vehicle? I didn't quite catch that. Or is it new vehicle, new fleet for this?
Yes, it will be a new fleet of vehicles, and essentially there'll be, whereas currently there is sort of one body on the back of the refuse lorry. It sort of goes in the back, gets compacted, and away you go. There will be two sections to it. So there will be a section that sits behind the cab of the vehicle,
right,
and that will be a side loading section, and then there'll be the bit that you currently have, which is the main rear loading element of the vehicle as well. So there will be new vehicles that are coming, and I think to pick up Councillor Noble's point from earlier as well, the expectation is that the vehicles will be arriving in the autumn time, and a go live not long after that.
Is there any return on all this food waste that's been collected? Because I mean, with the paper and so on, we can sell it on to paper manufacturer, make a bit of cash. Is there any cash coming our way from the sale of chicken bones and other rubbish?
Through you, Chairman. Not to us at this current time, but this is partly due to the organisational structure within Lincolnshire. So in the two-tier system, we are the collection authority, and the county council are the disposal authority. So any return that would be made through the sale or use of that material would go to the county council rather than us at this point.
No, good of them, isn't it? Nice to know that the county council is making some money out of us. The other thing I noticed actually in the report was, we come back to the business about the internal drainage boards, and the precept being 64% of retained council tax. And I know we're getting a bit of money back from government. Is there any pressure on them to reform the system really as such? Is there any way we can, because I mean, it's eating into 2/3 of our council tax. And whilst the council tax itself is not the most, well, not just the most significant area, we get money from all sorts of sources. It is an important one. Is the government thinking about us, or is it too concerned with having a number 10 in the north, should we say?
Yes, through you, Chairman. Yeah, possibly the answer to both is yes. I think there are clearly some wider national issues that may be directing attention at the moment. At the same time, the special interest group continues to work and lobby hard on government, and some of the messages are being heard. There is currently a review which is being commissioned by government that DEFRA are undertaking around drainage boards and the impacts that it has, and in part how then the money that has been allocated will be distributed. So that work is ongoing. We haven't yet got the answer we want, but we're not giving up.
Looking through the reports, I came to one about the yes, it's here on page 87. St. Botolph's Church visitor offer. Are we paying people to go to church now? It says here there's a project, hasn't it? St. Botolph's Church visitor offer, £25,000 this year. 18. I don't really understand what that is. Are we paying for? I know we pay for something at St. Botolph's. isn't that the nave or something? I think we do fund that. There's some connection between Bottom Borough Council and some potholes, but I don't really understand what that is about. It says some potholes church visitor offer right at the bottom, last line effectively on page 87.
Anyone able to comment on that? Would you be happy with a written response?
Yeah, so I said for instance, that's fine by me. Okay.
Apologies, Chairman. Do you say page 87? I'm just
Yeah, I've
struggling
got
to
page
find
87 in front of me. This that's 87. Yep. And the bottom it says St Botolph's Church visitor offer. I just wonder what that is. That's an LUF project. That's. I know that I'm sure that Bottom Borough Council funds the nave inside St Botolph's Church. I think that's historical. I believe that's right. But I didn't know what that was.
I think
It doesn't matter anyway. I'm happy to accept
a written response on that one.
Yeah, it's fine. Why not? Fine.
Yeah,
Thank you, Chairman. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you. If officers can take that away, and we'll get you the answer for that. Councillor Noble.
Chair, I have 3 questions. Firstly, on page 160, I noticed we've had a massive reduction in our income, our gross income. In 2024 to 25, it was 76 million plus, and then 25 to 26, it's down to 52 million. And presumably some of that is due to the fact that some of the grants we've had, like Levelling Up Fund, these have gone through the system. So are we expecting a significant reduction in income the next financial year or not?
Yes, you are correct. So this is where we have, as I mentioned, significant capital grants received in 24. Sorry.
Can you speak up?
Yes, sorry.
And you've got a lovely voice, but if you could speak a bit slower, because
Yes.
you do go very fast and sometimes it's hard to follow you.
Sorry.
Please. Thank you.
Yes, so as I mentioned, there were significant capital grants received in 24-25. It does depend on a lot of these schemes as to the profiling of that funding. So obviously, as part of Sean's cash flow management and working closely with the capital team, we do know when we've got these peaks and troughs of income coming in, but they can fluctuate year on year depending on the projects and the work that's going on.
This is not a magnificent sum, but I think it's on page 87. Bear with me. Yes, this is to do with capital enhancements. There was an overspend of 146,000. Do we know why we needed to overspend on that? That's on page 87.
Yes, so as per the out-term report, it says here spend is ahead of profile. So again, as I mentioned, this is a scheme that spans more than one financial year. It works on fire protection measures and costs are progressing as approved within the Q1 report, and the spend is ahead of profile. Therefore, there is acceleration from 26-27 into 25-26. So it's effectively ahead of schedule.
Okay, thank you. And my last question, it's to do with page 113. Yes, this is relates to debt impairment and housing benefit overpayment. Now, it looks like, according to under debt impairment, it's the second paragraph. It says an impairment allowance for doubtful debts of 62%, 1.27 million is deemed appropriate. So, are we effectively writing off that sum, 1,270,000? Yes or no? And obviously some of this is due to fraud in terms of detection of fraud with housing benefit. Are we happy with the regime we've got in place to detect and, as far as possible, eradicate fraud? Because obviously that's a significant sum of money.
So in terms of the first part of your question, if I can just explain how the impairment allowance is calculated. So effectively the bad debt provision, we assess the age and the status of the debts. So whether it's at first reminder stage or whether it's gone to a debt collection agency, how long it's been outstanding, how old it is, and there is a recovery process within our debt collection team that they do follow quite rigidly in terms of ensuring that debts are recovered as much as possible. So obviously the older debts are the more difficult they are to collect, and therefore the higher the provision against those debts. But we do review our approach on an annual basis to ensure that the percentages we allocate to each of those ages and categories of debts is appropriate. Does that answer your question to the first part?
You say that we rely on the debt collection agency to chase some of this stuff.
So we've got an internal debt collection team, but obviously once they've exhausted all options, things can be referred to debt collection agencies to try and collect on our behalf.
Okay, and given that everybody's labouring under fine economic constraints and problems, with the cost of living, cost of food, and everything, and utilities, do you think it is getting worse, the amount of fraud, because of that pressure, or do you think it's been pretty static over the last few years? We don't know.
I'll be honest, I'm not close enough to the detail on this one to be able to provide you with an answer, but if we can perhaps take it away.
Thank you. Are there any other questions or comments on this? Councillor Woodliffe.
Thank you, Chairman. I suppose the only one other thing I've got in mind is that page 132, we're looking at the fixed financial assets measured at fair value, and the M&G one. Now, are we able to finally close that one down? I mean, obviously we're trying to. I think it's been what do you say? Dissolved, isn't it? Wound up, yeah. So, what's the timescale for getting the cash out of M&G? Dare I ask?
I can answer that one, Chair.
Yep.
We are nearly getting to the end of the M&G liquidation process. We have, since the end of this current financial year, we have received a further payment, which means we've had funds.
Sorry, Sean, could you just move a bit closer to the microphone?
Sorry. Yes, we've had we've recovered at least the purchase cost of that investment, and there is, I think it's 2 assets they have available still for sale, but they are expecting the distribution process and liquidation process to hopefully be completed in the 2026-27 financial year.
Sean, how much do you think we'll get back from it? Will we get back what's predicted, or do you think that, well, it's asking an impossible question, is it really, I suppose?
Yes, we've received, as I stated, we've received a large payment. I'll refer to it in the Treasury annual report. There's a table on page 192 that shows that the book value at the end of the financial year was 117,240. We've had more than that back in the current financial year, 26-27 already. And at the end of the financial year, the net asset value of the remaining assets stood at 271,000. So looking at that, we would expect to receive in the region of probably 150,000 above what we originally paid for them.
Are we looking at removing the others, or what? I mean, with BlackRock and so on, Schroeder, etc., are they still considered to be safe places to put our investment, or are they considered as rocky as MG?
We continue to monitor all the property fund investments, and you do receive the quarterly Treasury report, which will always provide you with an update of those valuations. Property fund market is a difficult market at the moment. It is at the bottom of towards the bottom of the cycle as it stands at the moment. What with interest rates, war, COVID was the main downturn to that. Some of the funds that we have are facing large redemption requests, which does affect the investability of the funds going forward. But unfortunately, they are very illiquid, as was raised when the original investments were made. And it is a case at the moment of holding out and seeing where those funds go, the future direction of those funds. It may be that once those redemption requests are met, it may be that some of those funds may not be large enough to continue as a fund on its own, so they may merge with other funds, or they may go down the same route as the M&G fund and liquidise all their assets and then return the monies raised to the investors based on the monies received and the percentage shareholdings that they hold. But it's very difficult at this stage to say what that direction for all those funds would be.
Russell, did you want to come in on that one?
Yes and no, Chairman. I was probably going to suggest that whilst the entirely valid sort of route of questioning, given the property funds are in the accounts, the next item is the annual Treasury report, and that may be that Sean's delivery of that would answer some of the questions, but that was the pure comment I was going to make. Thank you.
Thank you. Any final questions or comments? No.
Chair, just like to say, I thought the report was very comprehensive. It takes a long time to get through, but all the details there. So I thought it was good.
Thank you. Russell.
Yes, thank you, Chair. I would, if I could, and it's probably not my place, I'd just like to say thank you to Ellie and the team, because I think getting the accounts produced to this standard by this deadline, bearing in mind 3 are being produced at the same time, I think is quite an achievement. So it might be worth the committee maybe noting that. Thank you.
Yeah, is everyone happy that that's noted in there? Yes, thank you very much to yourself and the whole team. Thank you. So we've commented on this, and is everyone happy to take that as noted? Excellent, thank you. The 5th item on the agenda is the annual Treasury report for 2025-2026. This starts on page 173 of the agenda pack. Sean Housen, the Treasury and Investments Manager, is with us. Sean, would you like to present this item?
Thank you, Chair. Yes, you have before you on page 173 the annual Treasury report for 2025-26. I propose to go to the main Appendix 1, which starts on Appendix 1 on page 180, and what I'll propose to do is tease out the main points of that report. By way of introduction, the Council is required by a regulation issued under the Local Government Act 2003 to produce an annual Treasury review of activities and the actual prudential and Treasury indicators for 2025-26. This report meets the requirements of both the SIPFA Code of Practice on Treasury Management and the SIPFA Prudential Code for Capital Finance in local authorities. During the 2025-26 financial year, the following reports have been received. An annual Treasury strategy in advance of the year as part of the budget setting report on the 3rd of March to Council, a mid-year Treasury report which went to Audit and Governance on the 17th of November and Council on the 12th of January, and an annual review report following the end of the financial year, which is this report being presented today. In addition, the Council has also received quarterly Treasury Management update reports on the 13th of October and the 21st of April, which are received by Audit and Governance Committee. The Council's capital expenditure and financing plans are shown at page 2, and the table on the top of page 181 provides a high-level summary of the actual expenditure on capital and how that's been financed. So you'll see total capital expenditure of just over £20 million, financing year of £19.83 million, leaving unfinanced capital expenditure of £533,000. Paragraph 3 refers to the Council's overall borrowing need. This is termed the underlying need to borrow for capital expenditure, commonly known as the capital financing requirement. This figure is a gauge of the Council's indebtedness for capital expenditure purposes. The table on the top of page 182 shows that the opening capital financing requirement at the start of the year was just over £18.5 million. We add to that the unfinanced capital expenditure in the year of £533,000, and we take off that the minimum revenue provision charge in respect of the property funds, other capital expenditure and finance lease repayments. So the final capital financing requirement at the end of the financial year was £18,685,000. The Council is not permitted to borrow in excess of the CFR. So you can see there on that second table on page 182, we have an overall gross borrowing position of £1 million, a capital financing requirement of £18.685 million. So a underborrowed position of £17.685 million. Council also to produce prudential indicators on page 183, at the top of the table on top of page 183. We calculate the actual financing cost as a proportion of the net revenue stream. So you'll see there the limits. We have an authorised limit of £38 million, an operational boundary of £35 million. and we've got a maximum gross borrowing position during the year of 1 million. The average borrowing position during the year was 989,000, and the overall financing cost as a proportion of the net revenue stream was minus 15.81%. That shows as a minus figure because the council receives more investment income than it pays out in investment interest payments. Paragraph 4 shows the Treasury position at the 31st of March 2026, and this is split between investments and borrowing. You'll see there that it's got fixed rate borrowing of 1.01 million counting accrued interest at a rate of 4.81%. There is an error on the average life in years, which also states 4.81%. That at 4.81, that should say 4.3 years effectively. And the investments of 35.382 million at an average rate of 4.43%, and the average life of those investments in years equates to 0.6. The next table provides the investment cash and cash equivalents held at the 31st of March. There are numerous tables there which splits between the types of investments, treasury investments, non-treasury investments, where those investments are held, maturity structure of the investments, and the exposure to fixed and variable interest rate. And you'll see from that final table on top of page 185, we've got a relatively even split between fixed rate and variable rate, fixed rate being 48% of the investments and variable rate being 52% of the investments. Paragraph 5 refers to the council strategy for 2025-26. This summary has been provided by, commentary has been provided by MUFG, who are the council's external treasury advisors. And you'll see there from that chart at the top, this chart shows the investment rates. And you can see from April through to around about start of January, February, the interest rates available in the market was on a downward trajectory. But then we got the war in the Middle East and the interest rates shot up towards the end of the financial year. The bank rate at the start of the year started at 4.5%, and at the end of the financial year, that had fallen to 3.75%. Paragraph 5.2 on page 186 refers to the council's borrowing strategy and control of interest rate risk. During 2025-26, the authority maintained an underborrowed position. This meant that the capital borrowing need, commonly known as the capital financing requirement, was not fully funded with loan debt, as cash supporting the authority's reserve balances and cash flows was used as an interim measure. The table on the bottom of page 186 showed what the forecast was at the start of the financial year for interest rates. And you can see this forecast was produced on the 11th of November 2024, and they expected interest rates by March 2026 to be 3.75%, and that was where we actually finished at 3.75%. The chart on the top of page 187 provides a graph in relation to the Public Works Loan Board rates over varying different periods. And as you can see there, they've been relatively flat, albeit up and down during the start of the year through to February. And then we got to that Middle East war situation again, and all of a sudden the interest rates shot up. Paragraph 6 provides some information in relation to the borrowing outturn. If I go to that rescheduling line at the start of the financial year, the council had a £1 million loan with State Street at a rate of 11.125%, which was due to mature in 2051. As previously reported at this committee, this loan was prematurely repaid, and I don't propose to go through the financial figures again, which are shown there. So at the end of the financial year, the loan that was with State Street was retaken out with PWLB at a lower rate. So at the 31st of March 2026, the council had a £1 million loan from PWLB at a rate of 4.81%, which matures on the 15th of July 2030. In relation to interest payments on borrowing for the year totaled £64,718 compared to an original budget of £111,250, which is just under a £50,000 saving. Investment outturn for 2025-26 at 0.7. Ellie referred to the resource balances in her report. This picks up the council's cash balances, which comprise of revenue and capital resources only and cash flow monies. And you'll see there that there's been a reduction of approximately £16 million, which is mainly due to, as previously stated, those capital grants now being applied. By way of performance, on the top of page 189, investment performance, The council held average treasury investment balance of £29.6 million during the year, which was internally managed, achieving an average rate of 4.75%, compared with the sterling overnight rate of 3.94%. The council also held average non-treasury investment balances of £17.1 million at cost with externally managed property fund investments, and these balances achieved a rate of 2.84%, giving a combined rate of return on all investments of 4.04%. The table on page 189 provides numbers behind all those figures. So you'll see that overall it provides the net position. So we had an annual budget net position of just over 2.25 million. We had an outturn of just under 2.45 million. So an overall surplus, favourable surplus of just under £196,000. In addition to the above, the council received distribution payments of just under 220,000 from the liquidation of the M&G Property Fund, and in accordance with the council's minimum revenue provision policy, these receipts have been used to finance the MRP charge to reduce the council's capital financing requirement. Section 8 of the report on page 190 provides the economic and interest rate forecast commentary from MUFG, our external treasury advisors, and this is here for information. But the two key points from that has been that inflation has remained stubbornly high, and that the bank base rate, as previously stated, started the year at 4.5% and ended at 3.75%. Section 9 picks up other issues, and in relation to this, the key area that we highlight here is the council's property funds. Based on cost, the council has £17.1 million property fund investments remaining, and the table on page 192 provides further details in relation to those investments. So you'll see the purchase cost in the first column of £17.1 million. The net asset value at the end of the financial year was £14.4 million, giving an overall reduction in value of just under £2.7 million, of which just under 600,000 of that related to the 2025-26 financial year. In relation to the returns received, the council budgeted to receive investment income from those property funds of just under 700,000, and the actual outturn for investment income on property funds was 486,000. The final table on page 193 provides the analysis of the property fund investments since purchase. So you'll see there that since we purchased those property funds, we've received distributions of just over £5 million. As you will be aware that the council originally had borrowing relating to these property funds, which was prematurely repaid. So the overall borrowing cost in that period was just under £1.9 million. So overall, since purchasing the property fund investments, the net revenue position is just under £3.2 million. In relation to council's change in risk appetite, there's been no change in the council's risk appetite during the 2025-26 financial year. And the recommendation is that Audit and Governance scrutinise the Treasury Annual Report and make any comments for consideration by Council on the 13th of July 2026. Happy to take any questions. Thank you.
Thank you. I'll open up for questions and begin with Councillor Noble.
Thank you. Sure. Yes. Sure. Again, very comprehensive report. Excellent. I've got a big picture question and a small picture question for you. Now, when we bought the property funds, which I think was essentially back in 2017 to 2018, we were told obviously we'd get money from the distributions and also the value of our investments in the funds would go up. Now, according to the previous document we looked at, which was page 132, it says there that the combined purchase price of property fund investment was 20.990 million, nearly 21 million, and the decrease in value since has been 6.561 million. So in hindsight, do you think it was a mistake for us to invest in the property funds, given that the actual value of our property funds have gone down, albeit I know we've received money from the distributions? What's your comment on that?
Where did you get the figure in relation to the £6 million reduction? Was that in the financial statement?
Yeah, not in your document. In the previous document we were looking at, which was Ellie's document, on page 132, it talks about a combined purchase price of the property investments as 20.990 million. Okay, and then it says the decrease in value since purchase as at 31st of March 2026 is 6.561 million. Okay, now it's interesting because I juxtapose that with page 192 of your report, which says the purchase cost was 17 million, and then the net asset value is now 14 million or 14.5 million. So there seems a bit of a discrepancy there. I don't know if you can explain that.
Yes, the figure that's been quoted in the statements was the original purchase cost of the property funds at the time they were purchased.
Yes.
But what this has done in the Treasury report, the purchase has been cost for the M&G fund has been reduced because the funds have been received back.
Okay.
So this is the outstanding purchase cost. So that's where you've got just under £4 million difference due to the fact that we've received just under £4 million back from the M&G property fund. In relation to your point, in relation to whether I think the investments were a good investment. When the decision was made, as you know, it was a long-term decision.
Yeah.
The view is a 50-year life cycle, generally speaking, for property fund investments. And when COVID hit and interest rates were down at 0.1%, the councils were receiving considerable benefit on its investment income due to the fact that they were holding investment in property funds and still receiving 3.5–4% on those funds. Obviously, the council has seen a reduction in the property asset values due to the downward cycle in property funds. And as previously stated, a couple of the funds have got large redemption requests. And it's surprising, as you can see there, the Schroeder fund, I think some of the reasons why the valuations have reduced is due to the fact that they are having to meet these redemption requests, and the AEW fund is another one that got large redemption requests. So I think it's a case of I will be reporting later when we get further information as to the viability of these funds. But as far as exiting the funds, it's a difficult decision to make because if we take, for example, the AEW suspension, exiting the funds has been suspended at the moment. And just before the suspension was made, if you wanted to exit the funds, you had to take a 20% reduction in the net asset value to exit that fund. And clearly that's probably something that the councils would not want to do.
Thank you. Yes. Before I go into my small picture question to try and retract, I was going to ask you. Yes, you mentioned COVID, and in your opinion, have commercial property values been in the doldrums pretty much ever since, or do you think it's particularly bad for in the UK's case?
I think the situation hasn't been helped by the Middle East situation as well, because what tends to happen is as interest rates reduce, obviously the returns that the people can get on their money with low interest rates is very low. So they then the cost of financing purchase of property becomes cheaper, and the returns on those property fund investments become more attractive. But interest rates, it's fair to say, haven't fallen as quickly as was expected. And that was exacerbated by the situation by COVID and also the situation by the war in the Middle East.
Last question, yeah, small picture question. 189, obviously we had a reduction in our expected income and the distributions of 205,000, yes. So can you explain why? Do you think that's inevitable or just disappointing or what?
Any shortfall on the investment returns that we receive is always disappointing, but some of that is due to the fact that we budgeted for returns from the larger returns from the M&G fund, thinking that the fund would still have quite a large amount of assets left, albeit, as I've stated, that we've received some large distributions from that. So whilst it's gone from the distributions from M&G are lower and has affected that overall return on property funds, that money has come into the council's bank and is invested by myself on behalf of the council, so is now switched into the treasury income section. But also, I think what we will find has been happening on some of those funds that are meeting large redemption requests, they're not distributing all the returns that they've had in the past. because they're having to meet those redemption requests without hopefully trying to sell assets to meet the payments.
Can I just say that our treasury returns have been good? I think because going back 2 or 3 years, we had the money invested on shorter terms, and now we've gone to longer terms, but within a year, and we've had, I think, 4.5 average yes return on treasury. So I thought that was a good move. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Noble. Councillor Woodliff.
Thank you, Chairman. Sean, would it have been possible to us to invest it more widely rather than when we borrowed the money from the government and Public Works Loan Board, well, 15 million or whatever it was, would have been able to have invested more widely in the market? Because obviously when we're investing in Schroders and BlackRock and so on, these are all one specific area basically of the property companies. Yeah, that's right. So one specific area. It does seem to me, I mean, if I can think about one particular charity I sit on, is that this particular charity now invests its money through a stockbroker, I suppose, basically, or whatever it is, and it's spread right across 100 companies. The advantage of being, I suppose, that if one company goes up, the other one goes down, and so on. Could we have done that type of thing perhaps in 2018, thereby offsetting the risk to our capital through investing just in one particular commercial area? Would that have been feasible, taking that 17 million and spread it across, say, on a like BA Systems or whatever, right across to purchasing gold or whatever, as an example? Would we have been able to do that? Would the government have allowed us to do it?
Strictly speaking, we didn't borrow to effectively as a result of the purchase of the property funds, because the council can't borrow to invest. It's not legal to do that. It is just coincidence that at the time the council made the decision to purchase £20 million worth of property funds through the management team and full council, and that obviously increased as it was unfinanced. That increased the council's capital financing requirement. In other words, its underlying need to borrow. So at some point in time, when the council's cash balances dictate that it needs to bring more cash in to finance its capital expenditure, that is when the borrowing is undertaken. But the borrowing itself is not strictly attributed to any particular item of capital expenditure. It's just borrowing in respect of the overall council's capital financing requirement. As far as the decision to invest in the property funds, obviously it was a long-term decision, and the council can invest in what it likes, give or take. There are some things that it can't invest in, but it can do. It can't invest in stocks and shares, for example, and it can't invest in non-sterling. Would be a good example as well. But at the time, the decision was made by the management team and council, approved that report to invest these this £20 million in property funds. And I think the aim was to create a capital appreciation, gains on capital investments, which can be used as the capital receipt when sold and used to finance other capital expenditure over the life of the 50 year. It's been unfortunate that the property market cycle is at a low, but if you look at the full 50 years, I won't be here in 40 years time probably, but in 40 years time you'll probably find that it will be 3-4 times the value that was originally invested. But
well, thank you very much for that. I mean, I hope you are here in 40 years time. I'm sorry, I won't be. It just seems, in a sense, it's kind of sleight of hand, isn't it? And so you can't borrow money from the government to invest. So what you decide to do, you can invest money, and then you borrow money on your capital financing requirement area to fund your particular policy, which is speculating on the commercial property market, really, isn't it? I mean, it's an accounting mechanism, isn't it? Really, we're looking at a rather slippery one, dare I say. I mean, we can't go back to the past, and I certainly did approve the idea in the past. It seemed a good idea where we were borrow money, invest in property market, then the value of the asset would increase with inflation, and we will get a return, financial return investment, which would be sufficient to pay the interest on the loan from the government. That would seem to be how it was sold to us, and that seemed perfectly reasonable at the time, but hasn't quite worked out that way, really. Is that fair? Am I being unreasonable? Am I?
So, if you'd like to come in.
Yes, it's probably one for me, and I think as you say, the coincidental nature of taking out borrowing and having then the funds available to invest, that's how you manage your finances in the round, isn't it? These things sometimes come together seamlessly, which is quite helpful. It's probably worth also just remembering that the loan that was taken out around the time was then repaid prematurely at a significant discount as well. So I think whilst you have the carrying values in here, I think we had a discount in the region of £6 million. So when you consider those facts as well, you put the pieces together, and they've probably held up quite well. As you say, in terms of the investment portfolio, I mean, you could look at all sorts of different assets, and a lot of it comes down to, obviously, there are some restrictions that we have in terms of the frameworks we have to operate in. But as a council, we then have some flexibility as well, and it's where you feel confident with the risk, but also our skill set to manage that. And ultimately, the property funds are asset backed, so there's always that side of it, which is quite useful. Overall, if we just take our two core investments, which is essentially cash or the property funds, in terms of a balanced portfolio, it's probably worked out quite well over the years. I think when interest rates have been low and the cash returns have been low, the property funds have stepped up and almost balanced that out. Now we're at a point where the property funds are probably that bit lower than we can get on cash, but not terrible by any means, but that bit lower than we can get on cash. Cash has come up, and it just helps maintain that position. So I think, whilst I'm not going to say it's perfect and it couldn't be done better, actually, it's not a bad place to be. So, like I say, hindsight's a wonderful thing, isn't it? And you can always do things slightly differently. But I think on balance, it's probably not worked out badly at all for the council.
Well, obviously, I'd like to congratulate Sean and the officers for obtaining that payoff. Where we made £6 million profit. I think it was a brilliant move. Really brilliant move. I hope that brilliant move was well rewarded for our officers. I'd like to think it was. I don't press that one too much, but it was. You gave us £6 million profit. That's absolutely amazing, stunning, really. And I don't think we quite appreciate how lucky we are to have the skill of the officers we have. Their skill. I do hand it to you, Sean. Absolutely brilliant. Well done. And I hope you got a significant pay rise, but I shouldn't say that, should I, really? Thank you very much, Chairman.
Thank you very much, Councillor Woodliff. Were there any other questions or comments? Councillor Pryke.
Remembering that this council has a very limited life ahead of it, I think we're going to have a death sentence is going to be pronounced in the next couple of weeks. I'm very pleased that Boston Borough Council is going to hand on to the successor council a pretty good financial report here, and it's far better than what I know of the other councils we might be joining up with in Lincolnshire. And I'll reiterate congratulations to our officers over time in achieving this, and I think we should be very proud of that. Commend them to Cabinet and also to Council in due course when these papers go through. Now, it was interesting to be reminded that the government doesn't allow the council to borrow money when our current government's pretty much entire basis of financing was we will only borrow to invest. And I think history will judge them rather harshly on that, because they're borrowing to do other things. Current Chancellor may not be in office for much longer, but the indications are that things may change slightly at government level. But I can't see government allowing local authorities to borrow money anytime soon. So we're all going to have to deal with that in the future, which is a shame. But again, congratulations to our officers for giving us a good legacy to whatever goes on. Now, a very small point for Sean. Obviously, there's a time lag in preparation of papers for this committee and presumably all the other decision-making bodies in the council. How long ago, Sean, did MUFG give you this report? Because it obviously doesn't take into account the on-again, off-again war in the Straits of Hormuz. It does mention the on-again, off-again threat of tariffs, including the current one of 100% tariffs on everything. But I think people could have foreseen that months ago from the president of the US. So basically, how long's the feed-in time for this information? Presumably you get reports weekly or more frequently than that. And this is several weeks old.
Yes, this report is the annual Treasury report, and what MUFG do is they provide us a template annual Treasury report, which includes this effectively economic commentary of what's happened during the financial year 2025-26. And I think in one area they've expanded a little bit as to what's happening at the start of the next financial year. But what you will see in the quarterly reports as well, they provide us templates for quarter 1, 2, 3, and 4. So that will provide us an up-to-date information for each quarter as to what's happened on a quarterly and a cumulative basis. We do get regular updates from our external Treasury advisors of what's happening. Whenever they review their interest rate forecasts, they provide us those. They tend to review their interest rate forecasts after each Monetary Policy Committee when the Monetary Policy Committee minutes are released. And then what we do is we look at those for effectively informing our decisions on any borrowing we may be considering to take, or our investments as to the length of time to invest to try and maximise the rates of return. So if interest rates forecast to reduce, we need to get as much money invested out now. And if interest rates are likely to increase, then don't invest too long because you may get higher interest rates at a later date. So yes, we are always getting revised forecasts. They also provide us with seminars whereby they get economic forecasters in to give presentations. Royal London Asset Management is one of them that provides regular presentations. And that always informs officers as to what's happening in the global environment.
Could you just put your microphone on, Councillor? Thank you.
So this would be a quarterly report up to about April or May.
Yes, we get, so for example, quarter 1 at the end of June, once we get to probably the second week in July, they will provide us that template report that provides the economic commentary for the first quarter that feeds into your quarter 1 report. And likewise, a couple of weeks after the quarter end, for quarter 2, we get another one, quarter 3, we get another one. And then the annual report, they provide us with, just after the end of the financial year, they will provide us with a summary as to what's happened in the global economy during the financial year, and also effectively what's been happening in the markets for interest rates during the financial year and is likely to happen probably in the future.
Okay, so it's April. Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Pryke. Are there any final questions or comments? Just one quick one from me, Sean. At the last sentence on page 193, there's been no change in the council's risk appetite. When was the last time our risk appetite was changed dramatically, or has it always gone along at a steady pace?
Generally speaking, the council's risk appetite is dictated by your Treasury strategy that is approved by council. What can happen, that Treasury strategy effectively sets your risk, your counterparty criteria, and that sort of thing, who you'll invest your money with, what types of investment instruments that you're prepared to invest in. And that strategy doesn't change a great deal each year. We'll review the investment limits. I think last time the CCLA money market fund, or should I say the money market fund limit, was increased from 7.5 million to 10 million. But that's only a operational change because the precepts for paying to the county councils, police, etc., are increasing more and more to the point that we need to have higher short-term investment balances available, and that's why we made the increase in the CCLA money market fund and money market fund limits. But generally speaking, we do review the counterparty criteria with Section 151 in advance of each financial year, and that is discussed as part of the budget setting report. But it may get to the stage that once you no longer have you've used the majority of your investment balances, you may want to change, for example, the maximum amount of money you would want to invest with a particular counterparty or a country or a type of investment. Because, for example, if you'd only got £10 million left in investment balances and you've got an investment limit of 5 million, you're investing 50% of your funds with one counterparty, and that probably wouldn't be appropriate.
Brilliant, thank you. And I'm happy just to accept a written answer, but in what way is our risk appetite different today than it was when we took out the property funds in 2017? And as I'm happy to take a written answer on that one.
I don't think it's changed a great deal, to be honest with you. But what we do is we are regularly monitoring the property funds a lot more frequently than we originally did when the property funds were obviously increasing in value. We are keeping a close eye on those and the position in relation to those funds, so that if the council decides to exit those funds when circumstances are favourable, we are in a position to act quickly.
Okay, thank you very much, Sean. Right, this will be a report that we have to vote on. So do I have a proposer for this? Councillor Noble, is there a seconder? Councillor Woodliff. So we'll move on to the actual vote. All those in favour? Any against? No, I think that's carried unanimously. We will move on to our next item, which is the draft annual governance statement for 2025-26. This starts on page 195 of the agenda, and Suzanne Rolfe will be presenting this for us.
Chair, make a point. Because the finance officers have completed their reports, do they need to stay if they want to go? Because we're on to the annual government statement now, aren't we?
Officers, I know some have been dropping off on the Teams meeting as well. So if officers do want to go, you're more than welcome to. I'll be doing a big thank you at the end for everyone as well for coming to tonight's meeting and being in the heat with us.
It's a very kind offer, Chairman, but I think everyone's very excited to see the last couple of items.
I can see it in all your eyes. Suzanne.
Thank you, no pressure. So this is the annual assessment of our governance arrangements. The committee will be familiar with this from last year. It is a regulated approach, so it is quite dry, for which I apologise. But it has been reviewed and updated with any governance changes that have happened over the last 12 months. It is up to date and there are no significant changes to highlight. I would just point you to page 209, which is where the actions are. In section 5, we've set out the action taken in response to the 2 significant governance items that were identified in the report last year. Those were around savings and financial resilience, which link back to the internal audit updates that you've had today. Nothing of concern, and those actions are in place and ongoing. And then in section 7 at the bottom of that page, we've set out the proposed actions for the next year. So those are around risk, again, coming from the audit report, audit actions, LGR and the budget process. So the recommendation is for committee to review and comment on this draft, and we'd welcome comments in particular on those proposed actions. Thank you.
Thank you. I'll open up for questions and comments. Councillor Noble.
It's one question really. It's not to do with risk house. This is on page appendix 1. It's page 3. Audit and Government we have a standard subcommittee, and has the committee has a hearing taken place in the last 12 months of our subcommittee? Yes or no? Thank you.
Okay. Are there any other questions or comments on this? No. So the committee is asked to make comment or no. I think everyone is happy to take that as noted. Excellent. Thank you very much. We'll move on to the final agenda item this evening. This is the work programme, which starts on page 211. The report sets out the committee's forward plan of business for the current municipal year, ensuring we continue to meet our governance and oversight responsibilities. As you can see, it includes the key areas of work regularly considered by the committee, such as risk, audit, financial reporting and governance. You're all invited to review this programme and suggest any amendments if required. I'll open up for comments and questions. I'll just start with one quickly. We've mentioned AI governance. Did you want to cover that on a separate agenda item or under an existing quarter risk report, Suzanne?
Would that be all right on the quarterly report? We'll do that in the Q2 one. So Q1 will be the risk framework and Q2 will be AI, if that's okay.
Yep, I think that would be fine. Was there any other questions or comments? Gideon?
Chair, when will we get the actual dates of these meetings? Have we had these already?
Those should have been circulated to members.
Right. I was just reading. I didn't want to check my calendar, but I was just reading on there. It said September without the actual day of the month, as it were.
Okay.
But that's the only reason I queried it. If we've had them, I'll have them on my calendar. But
Yes, they should have been emailed out to all members.
Fine. No, thank you.
With calendar invites and dates and times. Okay. So I will take that as everyone's happy with that being noted. So this concludes our evening's business. So thank you for all the officers who have come today and given various reports and listened to us. It is greatly appreciated you being here. It's always handy to have officers on hand if we do need to answer questions. And thank you for all the members for being here as well. I wish you a cooler evening in a more well circulated place. Thank you very much, everyone.